Daniel Chen stood in the marble courtyard of Harrison Elite Academy, his designer watch glinting in the autumn sun, his hand raised high above Maya Patel's trembling form as his three closest friends circled around them with phones out and cruel laughter spilling from their mouths. And for a moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. But what happened in the seconds that followed would change not just one life, but dozens, in ways none of them could have imagined. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of golden October day where leaves drifted like whispered secrets, and the air smelled of possibility. But in that courtyard, the only thing that hung in the air was Shemaya's cheeks burned crimson, as Daniel's hand hovered above her, not to strike, but to shove her backward, to dismiss her like trash, to send her sprawling in front of everyone as his friends recorded it for their social media. All because she'd accidentally bumped into him while carrying a tray of dishes from the faculty dining hall where she worked to pay for her partial scholarship. "You clumsy piece of nothing," Daniel had hissed, his voice dripping with the kind of entitlement that comes from never being told no, never facing consequence, never understanding that every person carries a universe inside them. His friends with his bleached hair, Trevor with his expensive sneakers, and James with his cold eyes had immediately formed a barrier around the scene. Their laughter like broken glass, their phones like weapons, and Maya had frozen, her slight frame in a faded blue work uniform, her dark hair escaping from a ponytail, her brown eyes filling with tears. She refused to let fall, because she'd learned long ago that bullies feed on visible pain. Daniel's hand was still raised, his palm open to push her, when a voice cut through the courtyard like a sword through silk. "Daniel, Marcus, Chen, lower your hand this instant." Every head turned to see Catherine Chen, Daniel's mother, standing at the courtyard entrance in an elegant gray suit, her face a mask of controlled fury, her eyes the same hazel as her son's, blazing with something that made even Marcus stop recording. Catherine Chen was a woman of formidable reputation, a self-made philanthropist who'd built her fortune from nothing and now sat on the boards of 12 charities, and the look on her face in that moment could have frozen fire itself. Daniel's hand dropped slowly, confusion and embarrassment warring on his handsome features, but the damage was already partially done. Maya was still on her knees where she'd dropped when the dishes fell, porcelain pieces scattered around her like broken dreams. "Mother, this is just," Daniel began, but Catherine held up one finger, and he fell silent, because even in his arrogance he recognized the tone that meant his entire world was about to shift. "Everyone, disperse now," Catherine said quietly, and something in her voice made Marcus, Trevor, and James scatter like roaches when lights turn on. Though Marcus kept his phone out until Catherine's gaze landed on him, and he tucked it away, stumbling backward. Catherine walked slowly across the courtyard, her heels clicking against marble. But she didn't go to her son, she went to Maya, extending her hand to help the girl up, her touch gentle but firm. "Are you hurt?" Catherine asked, and Maya shook her head mutely, confused and terrified because wealthy people didn't help people like her. Wealthy people didn't even see people like her. "What's your name?" "Maya Patel, ma'am," the girl whispered, and Catherine's face shifted into something unreadable. "Patel," she repeated softly, and then louder, "from Mumbai originally. Father named Rajesh." Maya's eyes widened in shock. "Yes, but how?" And then Catherine did something that made Daniel's mouth fall open. She pulled Maya into a gentle embrace, carefully avoiding the sauce stains on the girl's uniform. "Your father saved my life 23 years ago, Catherine," said her voice thick with emotion. "I was drowning in a riptide off Chowpatty Beach when I was volunteering there after college, and a stranger pulled me out, gave me CPR, stayed with me until the ambulance came, and when I tried to thank him, to reward him, he said that kindness needs no reward, only to be passed forward. Never forgot his face, and you have his eyes." The courtyard had gone completely silent now, except for the whisper of wind through the elm trees. And Daniel stood frozen, watching his mother hold this poor scholarship student like she was made of precious metal, and something cold began to seep into his chest, something that might have been the first stirrings of shame. Catherine pulled back, keeping her hands on Maya's shoulders, and said, "I looked for him for years, tried to find him to thank him properly. But Mumbai is vast, and I only knew his first name, and now here is his daughter, on her knees in front of my son." She turned then, slowly, and the look she gave Daniel could have carved stone. "Do you know what your father and I came from, Daniel? Do you have any idea?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, aware that other students were watching from windows and doorways, drawn by the commotion. "You've told me," he muttered. "No," Catherine said sharply, "I've spoken words. But you've never listened. Your father and I both grew up in poverty, real poverty, the kind where you choose between medicine and food, where you wear shoes with holes and pretend your feet don't freeze, where you work 3 jobs and still can't make rent. We built everything from nothing, and we gave you everything, and somehow in the process of giving you everything, we gave you nothing of value at all." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Daniel had never seen his mother cry, but tears were sliding down her cheeks now. "I'm sorry," he said automatically, the words he always said when he was caught, empty syllables. "You're not," Catherine said. "Not yet, but you will give me your wallet, your phone, your keys, and your watch." "What, Mother? You can't." But her hand was already out, and something in her stance told him this was not negotiable. With shaking hands, Daniel removed his phone from his pocket, pulled his wallet from his jacket, took off the 15th watch his father had given him for his 20th birthday, and handed over his car keys. "You're going to learn what it means to build something from nothing," Catherine said quietly, effective immediately. "Your credit cards are canceled, your allowance is stopped, your car is going back to the dealership, and your tuition for next semester will need to be earned by you. I'll pay for this semester only, but you'll work for your room and board. And if you want money for food beyond the basic meal plan, you'll earn that too." Daniel's face had gone white. "You can't do this. Father won't." "Your father," Catherine interrupted, "is the one who suggested it. We've been discussing it for months, watching you become more entitled, more cruel, more like everything. We fought not to be this incident, just accelerated our timeline." She turned back to Maya, who was watching with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Ms. Patel, I'm going to make sure you receive a full scholarship for your remaining time here, and I'd like to offer you a part-time position at my foundation with actual pay and reasonable hours. But, more than that, I'd like your help with something." Maya nodded slowly, still processing. "I'd like you to help teach my son what your father tried to teach me, that every person has value, that kindness is the only currency that matters, and that who we are is defined not by what we have, but by what we give." And that was how Daniel Chen found himself, 1 week later, standing in the kitchen of Harrison's dining hall, at 5 in the morning, wearing a faded work uniform, identical to the one Maya had been wearing when he'd tried to humiliate her. His hands red and raw from scrubbing industrial pots, his back aching from mopping floors, his pride shattered into 1,000 pieces that cut him every time he tried to reassemble them. Maya worked the same shift, and she didn't speak to him except to give necessary instructions, her voice neutral, her face unreadable, and somehow her silence was worse than any accusation could have been. The other kitchen workers, mostly scholarship students and local community members, had heard what happened, and they treated Daniel with cold courtesy, letting him have the worst jobs, the heaviest lifting, the dirtiest work, and he couldn't complain because he had no one to complain to. No privilege to fall back on, no escape route. His former friends had vanished the moment his money did, their group chats suddenly silent, their calls unreturned, and Daniel learned a bitter lesson that relationships built on wealth dissolve the moment the foundation cracks. For the first 2 weeks, he was angry, so angry he could barely see straight. Convinced his mother was being unreasonable, that this was abuse, that he was the victim, but slowly, as his hands learned the rhythm of work, as his body adjusted to exhaustion. As he watched Maya and the others, something began to shift. He noticed things he'd never seen before, the way Carlos, the head cook, always made extra food and quietly packed it for workers to take home to their families. The way Mrs. Henderson, the 60-year-old dishwasher, smiled through the pain of arthritis because this job's health insurance covered her husband's cancer treatments. The way Maya stayed an extra hour every Tuesday to help the new workers learn the systems, never asking for overtime, just helping because help was needed. He noticed that these people, whom he'd looked through like they were transparent his entire life, were more alive, more real, more human than anyone in his former circle. They told jokes while washing dishes, shared food from their lunches, asked about each other's families, celebrated small victories like a good test score or a child's first steps, and mourned together when Mrs. Henderson's husband took a turn for the worse. Daniel found himself, for the first time in his life, part of something that didn't revolve around money or status, and it was terrifying and uncomfortable and strangely compelling. One morning, about a month into his new life, he arrived at 4:30 instead of 5 and found Maya already there, sitting alone in the dark kitchen with her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and before he could think about it, before his old self could reassert itself, he sat down across from her and asked, "What's wrong?" She looked up, surprised, her face wet with tears, and for a moment he thought she'd tell him to leave, but instead she said, "My little brother needs surgery, his appendix. And even with insurance the copay is $3,000, and we don't have it. My mom is working double shifts. I'm trying to pick up extra hours, but we can't get there in time, and I'm so scared." Without hesitation, Daniel said, "I'll ask my mother," but Maya's face hardened immediately. "I don't want charity," she said coldly. "I don't want handouts from people who feel guilty. I want to earn it." "It's not charity," Daniel said, the words tumbling out. "It's repayment. Her father saved my mother's life and never asked for anything. Let us help, please." And he was shocked to find that he meant it, that he genuinely wanted to help, not for his image or to feel superior, but because the thought of Maya's little brother suffering when he had the means to prevent it made him physically ill. Maya studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there made her features soften slightly. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, and then, "Why are you here early?" Daniel shrugged, embarrassed. "I wanted to get better at the bread prep. I keep messing up the timing and making everyone else's jobs harder. Thought I'd practice, and it was such a small thing, such an insignificant admission." But Maya's expression shifted into something that might have been the beginning of respect. "I'll show you," she said, standing and moving to the prep station. And for the next hour, in the quiet pre-dawn darkness, Maya taught Daniel how to properly knead dough, how to feel when the consistency was right, how to trust his hands instead of just following instructions. And it was in that simple, flour-dusted hour that something fundamental changed between them. Not friendship yet, but the possibility of it, the fragile first thread of connection between two people from different worlds. Daniel did talk to his mother, who paid for the surgery immediately and refused repayment, though she offered Maya's mother a job at the foundation that paid enough to cover future emergencies. And when Maya thanked Daniel awkwardly the next week, he found that the gratitude in her eyes felt better than any applause he'd ever received for his trust fund. Donations to causes he'd never cared about. The semester continued, autumn bleeding into winter, and Daniel's transformation was not sudden or cinematic in the way movies portray it. Was slow, painful, full of backsliding and frustration. Moments where he wanted to quit, to call his mother and beg for his old life back, but he didn't. Partly because he was stubborn, partly because he knew she wouldn't relent, and partly because he was beginning to see glimpses of someone in the mirror he might actually be able to respect. He learned that Marcus had posted the video of the courtyard incident online. But Catherine's lawyers had it removed within hours, and Marcus's family, who did business with the Chins, had apparently had a serious conversation with their son, because Marcus appeared one day in the dining hall, pale and nervous, asking if he could talk to Maya, and Daniel, his apology was clumsy and clearly coached. But there was genuine fear in his eyes, fear that he might end up like Daniel, stripped of privilege and forced to face consequences. And while Maya accepted the apology with grace, Daniel saw it for what it was, sorrow at being caught, not sorrow at causing harm. By December, Daniel had been promoted from dishwashing to food prep, not because of his name, but because he'd actually gotten good at it, because he showed up early and stayed late, because he listened to Carlos's instructions and didn't complain about the work. And the small spark of pride he felt when Carlos clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Good job today, Daniel," was more real than any achievement from his previous life. On the last day before winter break, Maya found him as he was changing out of his work uniform, and she held out a small wrapped package, looking embarrassed. "It's not much," she said, "but you've been working really hard, and I thought anyway, open it later," and she hurried away before he could respond. In his dorm room, alone, because his roommate had already left for the holidays, Daniel unwrapped the gift to find a simple leather notebook and a note in Maya's careful handwriting. "My father used to say that every day is a chance to write a new story. You can't erase the old pages, but you can fill the new ones with better words. I think you're learning to write something worth reading, Maya." Daniel sat on his bed, holding the notebook, and for the second time since the courtyard incident, he cried. But these tears were different, not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of gratitude and grief. Gratitude for the chance to become someone better, and grief for all the time he'd wasted being someone worse. When he went home for the holidays, his parents noticed the change immediately, the way he thanked the staff by name, the way he offered to help with meal prep, the way he asked his younger sister about her life instead of just talking about himself. And on Christmas morning, when Catherine gave him a small box, he opened it to find his watch, the expensive one he'd handed over in the courtyard. "You've earned the right to choose," Catherine said softly. "You can have your old life back, allowance restored, credit cards reactivated, or you can continue as you are, working for what you have, building something real. The choice is genuinely yours, Daniel. We won't force you either way." Daniel looked at the watch for a long moment, remembering the boy who'd worn it so casually while looking down on others, and then he closed the box and handed it back. "Sell it," he said quietly. "Donate the money to the scholarship fund in Maya's father's name. I'd rather wear the $20 watch I bought with my own paycheck. It keeps time just as well, and it reminds me of who I want to be." His father, who'd been silent through most of Daniel's transformation, spoke for the first time. "I'm proud of you, son," and those 4 words meant more than any amount of money ever could. The spring semester brought new challenges. Daniel declared a major in social work instead of business, began volunteering at homeless shelters on weekends, started a campus organization to connect wealthy students with community service opportunities, and slowly, carefully, built a genuine friendship with Maya, one based not on guilt or obligation, but on mutual respect and shared values. They studied together in the library, worked shifts together in the kitchen, talked about books and dreams, and the kind of people they wanted to become. And Daniel learned that Maya wanted to be a teacher, to work in underserved communities, to give other kids the chances she'd fought so hard to earn for herself. On the anniversary of the courtyard incident, Daniel asked Maya if she'd walk with him to that same marble courtyard, and though she looked puzzled, she agreed, standing in the same spot where he'd raised his hand, where he'd been ready to humiliate her for the entertainment of people who didn't really care about him. Daniel said, "I need to properly apologize. Not the rushed sorry I gave you that day, but a real acknowledgement of harm, Maya. I was cruel to you. I treated you as less than human. I was ready to hurt you, physically and emotionally, for no reason except that I could, and nothing I do can erase that moment. But I want you to know that I see it clearly. I'm ashamed of it deeply, and I'm committed to spending the rest of my life making sure I never treat another person that way again." Maya was quiet for a moment, the spring sun warm on both their faces, and then she said, "I forgive you. Daniel, I forgave you a while ago actually, because I watched you do the work, the real internal work of changing, and that's rare and valuable. And my father always said that we should honor genuine transformation, that people aren't their worst moments if they're willing to build better ones." She smiled then, soft and genuine. "Besides, you make terrible bread dough without supervision. Someone has to keep you accountable." Daniel laughed. This sounds bright and free, and in that moment, standing in the place where his old life had ended and his new one had begun, he felt something he'd never experienced before: genuine peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're becoming someone you can respect, someone who adds value to the world instead of just taking from it. 2 years later, at graduation, Daniel walked across the stage to receive his degree in social work, magna cum laude, earned through his own effort rather than family donations. And in the audience sat his parents, his sister, Maya, and her whole family, including her little brother who was healthy and thriving, Carlos, and Mrs. Henderson from the kitchen, and a dozen other people whose lives had touched his and changed him in small but fundamental ways. His mother had tears streaming down her face, and when he found her after the ceremony, she pulled him close and whispered, "The day in the courtyard was the hardest thing I've ever done, but watching you become this person, this genuinely good person, was worth every difficult moment. Your father would be proud." And Daniel realized she was talking about Rajesh Patel, not his own father, though his dad was beaming beside her. Daniel had been accepted to a graduate program for community development, with a full scholarship based on merit and his extensive volunteer work, and he'd already secured a job at his mother's foundation, not because of nepotism, but because he'd applied anonymously and been selected by the hiring committee for his qualifications. Maya was heading to graduate school too, for education, and though their paths would diverge geographically, they both knew the friendship they'd built was the kind that transcends distance. On the last night before they left campus, Daniel and Maya sat on a bench overlooking the courtyard, now bathed in soft evening light, and Daniel said, "Thank you for giving me a chance to be better." Maya shook her head. "I didn't give you anything, you did the work yourself. You chose to change. I just witnessed it." "Still," Daniel insisted, "you could have held on to the anger, demanded I be expelled, made my life hell in a dozen different ways, and it would have been justified. Instead, you showed me grace, and that grace created space for transformation." "My father used to say that justice and revenge are not the same thing," Maya said thoughtfully. "Revenge is about making someone suffer for their actions, but justice is about restoring balance, creating conditions for growth and change. What happened to you? Losing your privilege, learning to work, that was justice. And justice that leads to genuine transformation is the best kind." As the sun set over Harrison Elite Academy, painting the marble courtyard in shades of gold and amber, Daniel thought about the boy he'd been, hand-raised in cruelty, surrounded by false friends and empty privilege, and the man he was becoming, shaped by consequences and compassion, by work and humility, by the unexpected grace of a girl whose father had taught her that kindness needs no reward, only to be passed forward. In the end, the justice that followed that terrible moment in the courtyard was not punishment for punishment's sake, but the hard, necessary work of becoming human, of learning that every person carries infinite worth, that true value is built through character rather than inherited through circumstance, and that sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give a child is the chance to fall, to fail, to face the truth of who they've been, and to rise as someone better. And Daniel, standing on the edge of a future he would build with his own hands rather than buy with someone else's money. Finally understood that the hand he'd raised in anger had, through the mysterious alchemy of consequence and grace, been transformed into hands that could help, that could build, that could reach out in genuine kindness rather than entitlement. And that transformation, that journey from cruelty to compassion, was the truest kind of justice anyone could hope for.